Hi again everyone. So now we will continue part 2 of chapter 24, which is the government and fiscal policy. So now we are only going to talk about multipliers and their effects. So in macroeconomics, we only have three multipliers, which are the government spending multiplier, tax multiplier, and balanced budget multiplier. So now we're going to talk about each one specifically. Okay, let's start by the government spending multiplier. It is the ratio of the change in the equilibrium level of output to a change in government spending. So government spending multiplier shows us what an increase in government spending by $1 will do to Y. Okay, and if you want to calculate it, we can calculate it by the equation as we see here. It's equal to 1 over MPS equal to 1 over 1 minus MPC. And in case you didn't know that MPS plus MPC is equal to 1, the marginal propensity to save plus the marginal propensity to consume is equal to 1. So that's why MPS is the same as 1 minus MPC. So if the government increases its spending by $1, then this will have an effect of 1 over MPS, which is the government spending multiplier, on Y. So Y will obviously change, and if you want to calculate the change in Y, we can do so by multiplying the government spending multiplier by the change in G, and we will have this equation. The change in Y will be equal 1 over MPS times the change in government spending. Okay, now let's move to the tax multiplier. A tax multiplier is the ratio of the change in the equilibrium level of output to a change in taxes. Okay, so tax multiplier shows us what a $1 increase in taxes, increase or decrease, can do to Y. Okay, so if you want to calculate the tax multiplier, it is as follows. It's minus MPC over MPS. Okay, so if taxes increase by $1, this will have a minus MPC over MPS impact on Y. So Y obviously changed, and if you want to calculate the change in Y due to the change in the taxes, then we can do change in Y equal to the tax multiplier times the change in T. So the equation becomes as follows: the change in Y equal to minus MPC over MPS times the change in taxes. Okay, now our last multiplier is the balanced budget multiplier. So as we know from the previous part of this chapter that the budget balance consists of taxes and government spending. Okay, and a balanced budget policy implies that the change in T is equal to the change in G. Okay, so the final total increase in the equilibrium level of Y is just equal to the initial balance increase in G and T. Okay, so in this case, we are assuming that the change in taxes is equal to the change in G. Okay, and when they are equal, then the balanced budget multiplier will be equal to 1. Okay, and because the balanced budget multiplier is equal to 1, the change in Y is going to equal the change of G or the change of T, because we know that change in T is equal to the change in G, so it doesn't really matter if you put in this equation change in G or T. So the change in Y is going to be equal 1 times change in G or the change in T. Okay. So now let's do a quick quiz. You can pause the video here and solve it and then check the answers in the next slide. So part 1 says assume that C consumption is equal to 100 to 0.75 YD, and that MPC is equal to 0.75, which also means that MPS is 1 minus 0.75, which is equal to 0.25, and that the changes in government spending is equal to 50, the change in taxes is equal to 100. Okay, so part 1 says, what is the government spending multiplier? Okay, as we saw in the previous slide, the government spending multiplier is 1 over MPS. So it's going to be equal 1 over 1 minus 0.75 equal to 1 over 0.25 equal to 4. And the second part of the question says, what is the change in Y if changes in G equal to 50? So we have the changes in government spending given, and we know from the previous part what is the government spending multiplier. So it's really obvious that change in Y is going to be equal government spending multiplier times the changes in G, and it will be equal to 4 times 50, which will give us 200. Okay, part 2, what is the tax multiplier? So we know also that tax multiplier is equal to minus MPC over MPS. Okay, so it's equal to minus 3. The second part says, what is the change in Y? So we have given that changes in taxes, which is 100, and we have the tax multiplier, so we only multiply them by each other. So the change in Y is going to be equal to tax multiplier times the changes in T, which is minus 3 times 100, which will give us minus 300. Okay, now moving to part 2, we are assuming that the change in government spending is equal to 100 and the change in T is 200. So we know here that both are equal. So part 1 says, what is the balanced budget multiplier? So we know from the previous slide that when the change in G is equal to the change in T, then the balanced budget multiplier is going to be equal 1. Okay, and part 2, what is the change in Y? So the change in Y is equal to the change in G or the change in T, since they are both equal, so it's going to be 200. And we can also say that change in Y is equal to the balanced budget multiplier times the change in G, and so it's 1 times 200, which will give us the same answer, which is 200. So that's it for chapter 24. I hope you enjoyed it, and thank you for listening.